Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and when we left Jake Adams of Reef Builders last week, we checked out his equipment on his tank. Well, today's the main attraction. Today, we look at the livestock.
Right.
So the main attraction is the livestock within the tank. You've got some pretty amazing pieces. Why don't you go through and tell us about some of your favorites?
You know, one of the things that attracts a lot of us to the reef aquarium hobby is all the equipment and toys, but if it doesn't perform, if it doesn't make the environment that you need to, then it's all for naught. You know, so at the end of the day, all that matters is having healthy, beautiful corals. And for me, these corals and the animals inside, they're not just ornamental. You know, a lot of these corals, maybe half of the corals in here have been in captivity for 10, 15, 25 years. Some of them I collected myself, and some of them I just think look cool.
So let's start off with the coral you collected yourself, because as an average hobbyist, most of us don't get to do that.
You know, it's really fun. It's like the best possible souvenir from going for a dive trip, right? I take all the pictures, take all the videos, I get little souvenirs at the gift shop. But the coolest part is some of the corals that I collect myself. And some of them are really awesome, and some of them are just like super duper normal. So some of the corals I've collected myself is this Anacropora. What's funny is like when I went after the purple monster in Solomon Islands, this was not one I collected. It was just sitting there when we were, you know, collecting the corals that we had already pre-collected, like when we were boxing them up. So this was sitting there. It was in really shallow water, so I decided to get that. So that's an Anacropora. This is a funky monopora species. I think it's Samarensis. And, you know, it's just greenish or whatever. It's not going to blow your mind. But this is really, really neat. This is actually, it looks like a Stylophora, which is called Palau Estrella. And in this tank, it looks like Stylophora, but in the wild, it looked a lot more like a Porites. So this is a cool one. What else did I collect myself? There's a shroom over here. This actually also came off a shipwreck, and there's a few pieces of that have already been spread out. It's kind of a lavender purple with big yellow-green bounce vesicles. There's that one, and there's a few others kicking around.
Didn't you say the big blue one came off of a...
oh yeah, this one right here. Yeah, the big blue tort echinata thing. This one was really, really neat, and it's actually changed color quite a bit. In the wild, it was green with blue tips. You know, it looked like an echinata tortuosa thing.
It's absolutely incredible.
And now it's only solid purple with light green tips. So yeah, that was a really
beautiful
one. Very, very neat.
Now, Jake, you've been in this hobby for a long time. Are there any corals that you've kept for a really long time?
You know, I really appreciate the corals that I collected myself because they remind me of where I was on the reef, where I harvested a small piece, you know, I didn't take the whole colony. But what I like more than that are the corals that are really old, the legacy corals and the vintage corals. This tank is full of them. So probably the granddaddy is going to be the Langside cap that I have right here. This one started being cultured in the late 90s. You know, so we're talking about almost 20 years, and this is the original green branching cap. This is one of the first LE corals from Steve Tyree, originally came from Omaha, Nebraska. Those are not my originals, but this candy coral, this weeping willow leather, what else?
Go back to that weeping willow. That thing is stunning.
Yeah.
Tell me a little more about that, because I don't think I've seen many like it.
I remember exactly where I was when I saw it. I went over to somebody's house, and he had a 55-gallon super normal reef tank with VHOs. And I went over to his house to just like service his tank or whatever with some friends. And I remember giving that coral a glance, and I thought it was an anemone. And you know, after that I got a frag. As soon as I saw it was a sarcophyton with like crazy long flowing polyps, I just lost it. I'm like, oh my god, I gotta have a frag. And I've been growing this strain on and off. It's important to point out that these are strains. It's not the coral that I've been growing for 20 years that's so small. It's a strain because I grow it out, frag it out, share it, then I'll move, then I'll get a frag back, and then I'll repeat the process. So this is also, you know, 2017, yeah, like, you know, 15-year-old plus corals. That one's one of them. The candy is green branching. This is about as bright of a hammer that you could get back in the day. This Ghani that's totally closed up now, the only closed coral, that's actually from a friend of mine that passed away. We call that the Herlock Ghani, but it's available locally. Oh, and this Merletti. This is also part of the super old legacy of corals that I've been growing since about 1999.
And absolutely stunning.
Yeah, pretty nice. Maybe a little bit much light on there. It'd be a little bit brilliant, a little bit more vivid with a little bit less light.
I'm noticing a lot of mushrooms in your tank. You're kind of a fan of these guys. Tell me about these two big, interesting ones right up front.
So right now the craze in the United States is for balance shrooms, and I just like what I like, you know, and a lot of us are like that, and I don't really follow the trends. But when I went to Australia, they don't have, earlier this year I went to Australia, they don't have access to the bounces and the crazy rhododactylus that we all have. So they're really gunning for these beautiful, just large, showy Recordia yumas. We get Recordia Florida all day, so yumas are just like, you know, they're kind of there. But the price in Australia is usually like 5 to 10 times more.
Ooh.
So when I came back from Australia, I had like this hankering for some large, showy yumas. So I actually picked these two up at Macna. I may have had a couple drinks when I was doing my final shopping run at the end of the show, and ended up getting two identical shrooms. They were from different people, but they clearly came from the same colony. So
But they're beautiful. They almost look like a carpet anemone.
they do look like a little carpet anemone, big purple splotch inside and more of a subtle orange ring on the outside. But they really love it there. I like them a lot.
So I'm a big fan of clams, and you've got two in that tank that I just haven't seen before. Tell me about these two special clams.
So what's crazy is earlier last year, almost exactly a year ago by the time this video comes out, I went to Palau, and Palau is like clam heaven because 30 years ago they set up the first clam farm. I visited this clam farm, put a beautiful video together, link will be in the description. But over there they have this stunning strain of crochets that I've seen elsewhere. They call them Mandarin crochets, and these are part of the breeding program in Palau. And they're just absolutely stunning. They almost have like teardrop pattern on them with a little bit of red, a little bit of green, and just super duper psychedelic. So I actually picked those up from Biota Aquariums in Florida, which got them from their parent company or their sister company, Biota Palau, from that exact clam farm. So that was really cool. So those clams are probably 5 or 6 years old, and they might have bred a couple times. But those, if I put some clams in here, I knew they were going to have to be like super duper stars. And the Mandarin crochet is one that I've always really loved.
Yeah, I'm impressed. Those things are just stunning.
They're up there, man. I really enjoy them.
So when I look at your tank, I noticed about half of the corals aren't on rocks. They're not on the sand bed. They're hanging on the walls. How did you do this?
Yeah, I don't even remember when was the... Actually, take that back. This is the first magnet I ever glued a coral to, and that would have been in 1996. I glued a tiny little piece of acropora on here. It was brown. It was the first acro I ever had. It died. We didn't know anything about what we were doing, and so I started a long time ago, and it's a trend I've kept up with a long time. A lot of our pumps are magnetically mounted. A lot of our switches and level sensors are magnetically mounted, and within the last few years we've had a lot of frag racks that have come on magnets. So when I put together this tank, I knew from the beginning that instead of building up to the back, I was going to put a shelf on the back and really just cover it with SPSs. And it's only in the last couple of months that that's really kind of come around to highlight the Anacro, the old school Florida Acro. What else we have? The two Legacy Montes and some assorted frags. So this is a permanent shelf here, but some of the corals are glued to the back. But like this is a magnetic frag shelf that has two galaxias. They're gonna have to go because they're sweeping like crazy.
But they're sweeping like crazy, so since they're on a magnet, you can move that easily.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if they're gonna go to my angelfish tank so that they can pop them a little bit, keep those sweepers trimmed. But that was from the beginning, like, okay, these corals are gonna be a pain in the future. I'm gonna put them on a magnetic rack. But on the left side, you can see a ton of LPS corals that are fastened to some kind of a magnetic mount. And that's two reasons. One, I want to put stuff on the back, and two, as they get bigger, you kind of need to scoot them apart, or scoot them close together, or scoot them wherever you want. And I really helps me to get the most out of this tank. I live in a tiny home, and I knew that I'm going to kind of force myself to stick with this tank. It's so easy to tell yourself, I'm going to get a bigger tank, it's really hard to follow through and make it as awesome as the tank you just upgraded from. So with this tank, I told myself, all right, I'm going to stick with it. I'm just going to maximize the density of corals in here as much as possible.
Well, I think you've done a great job just showing how great a relatively small tank can look.
You know, I really love peninsula style tanks because you can see it from both sides. And this is a cube that I can see from 3 sides. You know, so it's like, you know, it's like having 3 viewing windows into the same tank. You know, when you have a long rectangular tank, you know, you're looking at one static window. And so this helps to prolong the enjoyment of the tank itself. And here you can see like another frag rack. This is definitely a temporary frag rack. I've actually been waiting for you to come and do this video, document the tank as it is before I put these frags out. So that's last year's crop of frags, and they've now kind of you know, settled in and grown to the size, and I understand what they're going to do, what color they're going to have. So after this video is shot, I'm going to do a little bit of rearranging here in the tank.
So personally, I'm yet to see a perfect tank, and I've noticed little stuff like aptasia in your tank. What do you think is wrong with your tank, and what would you have done differently with it?
Well, first thing I really want to address the viewers, because we see super polished, perfected photos and videos of tanks all the time. And it's really important to understand that as vloggers, myself and Scott, we're always trying to make the tank look as amazing as possible, right? We're not pointing out the algae spots, we're not pointing out the issues, but I really want people to know that my tank is not perfect by any kind of measure. I am 1000% satisfied with the equipment. I really love my choice of equipment on here and everything that's set up. I wouldn't change very, very much. However, I've mentioned that this tank started out as an NPS tank, and then it was kind of low lit. So I have some stuff higher up which should probably be a little bit lower. We already touched a little bit on these frags being grown out, because I'm going to move a little bit more towards the SPS, especially for the top half of the tank. But you know, I don't have that dialed in yet. I don't know exactly where the corals are supposed to go. Obviously, I know the SPS need to go up higher, and some of the soft corals and LPS need to go down lower. Like for example, these 2 leather corals are already getting bigger, so I'm already kind of planning a tank that's going to be just for them, where they can get huge and just be nice, big, fat leather corals. Because you know, it's next year, those things are going to be way too big for this tank. But yeah, it's funny how this tank went from having 0 aptasia for like 9 months, and then when I started, you know, treating it like a more normal reef tank with light, aptasia started popping up. I've got a little bit of Valonia popping up here and there. The Bryopsis kind of comes and goes. Right now it seems to be going. One thing that you don't see in this tank that I actually fixed last week is it grows a lot of sponge. I had to suck out so much sponge from this tank last week. And I'm talking about like the branching, kind of loose sponge. It grows in here to a dangerous degree. We always think having a mixed reef with a lot of biodiversity is a sign of a healthy reef, and it is. But on a long enough timeline, those sponges, they are totally going to overgrow your corals. They're just going to choke things out. They're competing for nutrients and trace elements. So there's that. I do have a little bit of kind of like a non-troublesome flatworm that's on some of the corals, but it's the generic flatworm that will go under LPSs, on some of the SPS. It's not the same, it's not the acro-eating flatworm.
But it seems like if you're in the hobby long enough, you're going to get those.
Yes, but I don't accept that. I want my tank to be perfect. I want nothing to impede the health and vitality of the corals. Other than that, you know, I'm always kind of perfecting it, you know, especially when corals get healthier, they start like getting closer together and stinging each other, so that's always a challenge. This is a community reef, and it is a challenge to keep everything happy where it's at. This is one of my favorite corals, the pink Nephthia coral. Again, when I started this tank out, I only had an AI prime, and it was up there, but since I put the 2 radions, it's decided it's going to open opposite of the lighting schedule. So in the morning, it's huge, almost touching the surface, big and beautiful, and as the lights get brighter, it just closes up during the day. And as the lights dim, it opens back up in the evening. It's really, really interesting. So yeah, this is not your typical Nephthia. This is a pink morph from Japan specifically. It's really, really pink. I love it. Anything else in here? Yeah, I mean, it could always be bigger. The tank could always be bigger, I guess. You know, I love my sump, But if I had to do it over again, I would definitely start experimenting with some of these automatic filter rolls. You know, in my particular setup, I'm kind of designed and engineered out of using that particular type of equipment. So that's something that I wouldn't mind being able to try in the future. Yeah, otherwise everything else is just curation, right? It's what you do to the tank.
And talk about feeding your fish, because you've got some really nice fish in there and your feeding schedule is interesting.
So it's really important to have your baselines covered, right? You got to monitor pH, you have to top off evaporated water, you have to add a baseline of calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. But for the food, for the aquapower, for the no-pox, I really kind of wing it. And so when I'm really paying attention to the tank, I might feed the fish once or twice a day. I'll probably put a piece of nori in there 3 or 4 times a week, mostly to keep that yellow tang from picking on my precious prize clams, because he likes to do that a little bit. But I'm super lackadaisical when it comes to feeding. I might feed my fish 3 times a day. I might not feed it for 3 days. You know, and I feed mostly flake food. I target feed the corals probably a lot more deliberately than I feed the fish, that's for sure.
I love that. I mean, you're a coral guy through and through.
Absolutely, yeah. Every fish in here is just kind of things I've inherited, things that came with the tank. Yellow tang is good for eating a little bit of algae. But otherwise, I like having a dedicated fish tank where I can keep more delicate species and start seeing if I can keep corals with them instead of vice versa.
So for fish, you've got a whole nother tank of some incredible angels. Tell me about these.
You know, so when people have a reef tank, they have a reef tank so they can do it all. So they can have their corals, their LPS, their clams, and their fish. For some people, fish is really important. But for me, a reef tank is just to have the corals. So when I want to keep fish and I want something a little bit more demanding, I set up a separate tank just for these guys. So this tank literally was dry the day I received these fish, and then I made this tank just for them. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I call these black phantom angelfish because they actually don't really have a name, but they're a type of velvet angelfish, and they were so picky, so hard to get feeding, because at first they barely hit live blackworms, and then they barely hit frozen mysis, and it was another month. You know, it was probably 3 months until they both started eating pellets. It took a month and a half to get them to hang out together for the first part. And the only reason that's possible is because the smaller one, I'm calling her a she knows when he's coming. So she can just kind of duck out of the way. And I have a little bit of overflow coral. And these guys, they're such picky eaters. I'm like, I would probably put some corals in there with them. And yeah, euphyllias seem to be doing pretty good. Occasionally when a pellet of food falls into those corals, they'll actually pick at the coral. But, you know, so far so good. Moderate light. This is not even a reef system. But yeah, when I want special fish and I want to take care of the fish, I have a separate tank. What I love about this is I can feed them as much as I want. I don't have to worry about phosphates or nitrates or feeding the aptasia or anything like that. I can just do a decent water change, turn the lights down, and it's no problem.
And they are just absolutely incredibly beautiful. I love those fish.
Yeah, these are my pet fish. The fish over there, they're whatever. They're kind of supporting actors for the corals or doing some duties in the tank as far as eating algae. But these guys are absolutely my pets. I'm actually going to give them some food now. So one thing that's interesting about these fish is they're not very commonly encountered on reefs, and I was reading up about them when I got them, that they actually occur in very high flow areas. And this is one of the reasons we don't see them in our tanks so much. So these fish, I actually have the flow turned off just for feeding time, but normally the water flow in here is ripping and these guys really, really like it. But it's taken me like months to get them eating pellets, because before that it was just live blackworms and frozen mysis, which is, yeah, it's good for them, but it's also a little bit too rich. And it's also a lot of work to just always go thaw the food.
Oh, absolutely.
Or to get the live food. So I'm really glad I got them trained to eat this pelleted food, and I'll try to rain a little bit onto the euphyllias while I'm at it. Very cool. So yeah, this is my fish tank, and the only other thing I want to get for this is probably like 4 to 6 African flameback angels, and have a little pygmy angelfish harem, because it's one of my favorite angels, and I've never had them because they pick on corals. And there's no way I'm going to put it in my reef tank. No way. But in here, I think they'll be all right.
Absolutely. I love the idea of just a fish-only tank.
Yeah, feed them as much as you want. that grows a little algae, turn the light off for a week or two, and you know, enjoy each style to the fullest.
All right, Jake. Well, thank you so much for having me over to your house and checking it out, your tank. You got any closing statements before we go?
You know, I just feel like it's really important for people to develop their own style to make a reef tank that they enjoy. It's really natural to see pictures and videos online and think, my tank should look like that. You know, but really it's all about how you enjoy your reef tank. You know, that's one of the big ones. And, you know, the other thing is if you have 100 corals in your tank and one coral is suffering, one coral is dying, don't freak out. You know, just look at the positive side of things. So as humans, we're programmed to pay attention to the things that's going wrong. But really, in a reef tank, when you're doing a whole bunch of stuff, if you have 100 corals, one of them should be dying. You know, you should have a few corals that aren't quite perfect or dialed in. So, you know, that's one of the main ones.
I fully agree with that statement.
Yeah, very cool. So, yeah, thanks for having us over. You know, me and Scott are trying to do more collabs this year and throughout the year. We got a lot of cool stuff to look forward to. Definitely, if you enjoy this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to Scott's channel, Mile High Reefers, is one of my favorite channels.
And of course, subscribe to Reef Builders.
Very cool.
Check out the Reef Builders website, and I know we're seeing each other again in February. We've got a big event coming. Me
and Scott are, you know, both in Colorado, and the big ReefStock event is happening. Last year we had a big bash for the 10th ReefStock in a row. Here we're going into number 11, and we're going to have a great time. We've got Sanjay Yoshi coming. Vincent Chalias is flying all the way from Bali.
Sweet.
Scott, father of coral farming, and, you know, we're going to have a great time.
Hell yeah.
And since I'm running the show, Scott's going to be covering it. So you definitely want to subscribe so you don't miss that. So thanks for coming over, Scott.
All right, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We'll catch you guys
next time. It's been a great time. See you later.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.